And those are the concepts that, in my view, are critical to be successful. I oftentimes refer to them as my 7 pillars of program management. I won't elaborate on them now because of time limitation, but I'd be happy to take questions on any of them at the end. In regards to the WSIP, I also wanted to share my perspective on why I feel we were successful there, and because that's a question I oftentimes get. And first, I think one of the key was to clearly define the needs of the program in very simple terms and establishing specific goals for the program. And again, that allow the agency to successfully manage expectation from the stakeholders. The other thing we touched on that I think is very important is adopting those thoughtful strategy early on to provide alignment within the program team. The other thing is we were fortunate enough to be able to recruit some incredibly talented staff. Obviously, when you have a big type of program like that that is so exciting, you are able to get people who were willing to join the PUC, who had major experience delivering big programs like this around the world. The integration of consultants at all levels of the organization and having a unified team with our staff was also very important. We had a very nice blend. You would come to our offices, you could never tell who was a consultant, who was a staff. So I think that was also very critical. But in the end, I think what was so important was gaining and maintaining the trust of our stakeholders, our wholesale customers. And, you know, as director, that was my #1 priority, and that's where I put the most emphasis. When I took over the management of the WSIP, one of the first things I did was to read the memoir of Michael O'Shaughnessy, the architect of the HHE system, and there's one statement in there that really struck me. And now, believe me, I definitely have full appreciation for what he was trying to say there, and I think it's kind of incredible that, you know, a century later, his characterization of what it takes to implement a big program still holds true today. Now, before I take questions, if you want to bear with me, I'd like to take the opportunity to advocate for 2 water issues that are not necessarily directly related to program management, but are very dear to me. I'd like to strongly encourage everyone to drink tap water. Not only is it good for you, it's good for the environment, and this is a statistic that is pretty amazing to me. Next time you're ready to buy a new bottle of water, just consider that the energy footprint of that bottle is about 2,000 times greater the energy footprint of drinking the same quantity of tap water. Granted, I think those are statistics taken based on the HHE system, and it's an incredibly efficient system, no pumping and all. So 2,000 may not be for your water supply here in Sacramento or in other place in the nation, but bottom line though, drinking tap water saves money, and it definitely reduces the world energy footprint. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention has to do with the work I do outside my regular job, and it has to do with the water crisis around the world. And you know, I think it's hard to imagine that there's probably over 1 billion people around the world today who do not have access to potable water, and that's about 1 out of 8 in the world's population. And not that I want to be over dramatic here, but a child will lose their life every 20 seconds from a water-related disease in the developing world. So I've been volunteering now for 4 years for Water for People. I think they do amazing work, work that is not necessarily focused on building new infrastructure. It's more about building capacity inside these countries. It launched a very innovative Everyone Forever initiatives a couple years ago, and that is, I think, changing the way NGOs do work in Africa and other parts of the developing world. So I would strongly encourage you to check out the work that this organization does. I know for myself, my involvement with Water for People has brought me more satisfaction than anything else I've done in my life. So and there's different ways of supporting the organization, of course. So I think I can go back to the question slide now.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And, okay, it's on. So we are going to have some time for questions now, and before we do that, I want to thank you, not just for the whole presentation, which I think is fair to say is mind-boggling, just in terms of the scope of the project, but for mentioning Water for People, and just for putting in a plug for the fact that we have safe drinking water, which I think is what we're all about here. Yeah, we sometimes rely on those bottles for canteens, but I think across our program and across the industry, you know, we do set a pretty good example by drinking the water that we produce. However, I don't think we often take enough time to celebrate what a great job the people involved in providing safe drinking water in California are actually doing. So I do think we ought to, you know, give ourselves a chance to celebrate that every so often. For those of you that are online, I'll remind you again, you may email questions to coastalrm, that's COASTALRM @calepa.ca.gov. And in a moment, we will take questions here in the room. If you send in a question online, please do announce who you are with or where you are from. And for those of you here in the room, please also say your name and where you are from. So with that, do we have any questions here in the room? Okay, we have one right here from.
To echo Stefan earlier, I found it to be mind-blowing, inspiring, and transformative. I think for those that face large infrastructure projects ahead, that you've introduced a lot of new concepts. I found myself having a lot of questions during it, and I will try to hit a few that came up that I can recall. But one was, you mentioned relying on consultants, and part of that was during the peak workload to help offset some of that. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how specifically, I noticed they were also in your matrix, and how they specifically were integrated to reporting, or how did you rely on them?
Yeah, I mean, we had them, like I mentioned, we had them at the program level. On the matrix org chart that I showed, we had them reporting directly to us, but that's more at the programmatic level. And then we had them also at the project level. I'll start with the projects level because that's easy. On some of the projects, like for the design of a new dam, for the design of tunnels, we did not have the expertise in-house. We wanted them to take all liability. So it's like, go ahead, consultant, design those for us, sign the drawings, and you have all liability. So that was clear. There were other projects where we had some expertise in-house, and we wanted to use the opportunity to promote technology transfer. So on some of the more straightforward projects, we tried to combine our workforce with that of the consultant and give our engineers the opportunity to learn from engineers that may have had the opportunity to work on similar projects more extensively in the past. So there was some of that. At the program level, it was much more of an integrated type of approach. It was a city-led project. It is a city-led program, so ultimately we are in charge. But there are times where it is good to have a large consulting firm be able to validate some of the decisions you're making, having a third-party validation. And of course, if they work for you, they're not as independent as, and that's why we had also independent review panels that had nothing to do with our organization. But you know, you would come in one of our program meetings, which we had every week, and you could not really tell who in the room was a consultant. So they're co-located with us at the program level, and they are just an extension of our staff. It gets tricky when you want to have staff report to consultant. That's probably something you struggle here at the state as well, and we avoided that. That cannot happen. With that said, with the construction offices in the field, oftentimes the lead role, what we call the construction manager role, on a dam project, on a tunnel project, would be a consultant, because they're more experienced. And then we add, you know, office engineers and roles that fell under that position be consultant. So in the field, on the project, they, you know, technically they worked under a consultant, but as far as, you know, performance appraisal and as far as their true line of authority within the organization, it stayed with us. I'm not sure I'm explaining this well, but it's not always easy to do, but if you, from the beginning, instill confidence that these consultants are here to help our staff, then instead of taking staff's position, I think it can be done very well. Now it's interesting because now that I'm in the private sector, I am on the other side, and I think I have a better understanding of sometimes why staff tends to resist, you know, the involvement of consultant. But, you know, we created 85 new positions to deliver this program, and if we did not use consultants, we would have had to create God knows how many hundreds positions. And we all know that once you hire new staff in the public sector, you don't have as much flexibility as with the private sector to let go. I mean, you want to keep the staff. And in our case, what we did is we built up to a level where we knew we could keep these folks and move them to a different programs. So.
Thank you for answering that. I had one more question I wanted to introduce. I noticed in your timeline very early that a large portion of the project was dedicated to planning, which also incorporated that environmental review. And then later I noticed in a slide there was an overlap for some of that. Do you have any suggestions for anybody facing a large infrastructure project about, are there any rules of thumb about how much time you allocate? I realize, you know, it really probably is highly dependent on the type of project, but what's the line of thinking that might get you to, you know, this is what I might expect?
Yeah. Well, it has a lot to do with who in the case of CEQA, who the lead agency will be. In our case, the lead agency was the San Francisco Planning Department, and we knew from the beginning that they're notoriously conservative in the evaluation of their project. And at the beginning, I found it to be very frustrating because they wanted to make these documents so incredibly robust and solid. And I'm like, come on, you guys, you know, time is money. We need to. But then in the end, I applauded them because in the end, these documents were so solid that there was absolutely no way we could be challenged. So again, it's the idea of, I think one of the theme here is you know, invest up front to save later is a big theme. I think that, you know, more I think about it, and in the case of environmental review, as far as setting a time, my goal originally was 3 years, but many of these larger projects went 5 to 6 years. And then there's the permitting phase, also that cannot really begin until the environmental review is further along. I mean, the ties between design, environmental review, land acquisition, permitting is mind-boggling. But I think you cannot initiate, for example, you cannot initiate a good solid environmental review until you've got minimum 10% design. If not, ideally you'd like to be close to 30%. So you have no choice but to begin design. I mean, a planning, you know, an alternative analysis is not enough to start an environmental review. The other thing on the environmental review is, you know, do you wait until you tie down the design pretty tightly before you start it, or do you do an environmental review that is a little more broad and that allows you to take different alternatives? And there's not, that answer is specific to each design. In some cases it could be one, or cases it could be the other. So you, again, if you are rushing to implement, you're not going to give some thoughts to all these things. The other question I did not address in my presentation is, do you do a programmatic environmental review, or do you just do project-specific EIR? In the case of the WSIP, we did a programmatic to address bigger picture questions such as water supply, the whole idea of trading water or taking additional water from the Tuolumne River was big. You know, growth inducement type of issues, questions we wanted to address on a programmatic fashion. So I think it was, and then a lot of the key sections of the project-specific EIRs just refer to the programmatic. So that's another big question. And again, I don't think doing a programmatic is something I would necessarily recommend on all projects. It depends also on the environment you've got. I've seen program delivered in other parts of the country that did not have a rigorous environmental review. For any big projects, though, this is a long answer, but for any projects in California, it would be hard for me to think that you could deliver an EIR in less than 3 years on a complex project.
We do have some questions coming in online, but I'm going to take another one here in the room first. And those of you in the room, if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring this to you.
This sort of piggybacks off of the previous question. Thanks so much for.
Can you say who you are?
Oh, I'm Cedric Irving with the Division of Financial Assistance here at the State Water Board.
Okay.
And we fund water infrastructure projects. And thanks so much for being here. I got a lot of good gold nuggets from you.
Okay,
This one kind of piggybacks off the previous question, just about getting people's heads on straight early. You talked about how during the inception of a project, you know, all the people involved are really excited to go in a direction. And but you said it was also a good opportunity to slow down and make sure that we're clear about, you know, the things that we need to do. I was hoping that, can you like elaborate?
Elaborate on that.
And like like the need to build contingency plans, given.
Yeah.
And I work in environmental review, and sometimes there can be delays.
Yeah. So I'll give you a few examples, and I'll take it more at a programmatic level. So in our case, we knew we needed to deliver a certain improvements. But how are you going to package this? You know, how are you going to deliver? Are you going to deliver, you know, with a standard delivery method? Are you going to use alternative delivery method? Are you going to cut the pie in 20 pieces, 80 pieces? You know, how many contracts? And that then has to do with creating local jobs. And so you need to think about all these strategies. Environmentally, do I want to do a programmatic EIR or not? You know, as far as, there's all kinds of aspects. How do I want to staff up this program? Do I want to use consultant on this one or not? Those are all questions that need to be addressed early on. There's also the need for putting in place solid governance structure, you know, figure out the quality management strategy you're going to have. Environmentally, you know, we made some decision early on that we would take a step back and be a little more conservative with our strategy and work with interest group instead of trying to shove down the throat of everyone our projects. So those are thinking that you need to do early on instead of just getting into it and, oh, I wish we would have thought of that from the beginning. On the financial side, there's a lot of decisions. You know, I showed the work breakdown structure. How am I going to break down my project? And that's going to have implications on how I'm going to ask consultants to bill us. It's going to have implication on how I'm going to report to stakeholders. I mean, every decision you make has got some implications, and you need to take a step back and think of all that before you just start running with it.
As a follow-up, I saw those archaeological site that also ran through the site. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys did early on as far as Native American and cultural resources?
Yeah, there was a lot of exploratory work. Obviously, there's paper records of ancient sites that you need to be aware of, and whenever parts of your you know, project sites cross those known archaeologically sensitive areas, there's additional upfront work to be done. So in the case of the one project I showed, there was a lot of trenching ahead of the project performed to verify whether we could, impact those sites. In this case, we didn't, but there were other areas where there was no paper records where we did find all kinds of things. And in some areas, sometimes work was stopped for a month or two to try to figure out. Then we would work with state agencies. Oftentimes, Native American representative would need to be there to monitor excavation work. We had to protect anything we found. Yes, there was. In some cases, I think we even made, there was one case where we had to make a decision whether we were going to tunnel under the site or not. We decided to not do that. It would be too expensive, but we had to proceed very carefully and with monitors on site at all time. There were all kinds of interesting issues that came up that I could talk about that you don't think about when you start a program of this size. But for example, there was one project alone where we had 300 encroachments in our right-of-way. People had built swimming pools, they had built gazebo, couple houses extension were on our right-of-way, and we were going to come in and install a 84-inch pipeline. So, obviously there was a lot of press, one property in particular where it was an older lady who had her house in our right-of-way. So the choices at this point become, legally we could force her to move her house, but, the public relation issues related to that. So we decided to cover the costs and help her move the part of that room. There was a case where we had a ancient oak tree in our right-of-way, and again there was a lot of big public uproar about the need to cut that tree, and we decided we tunneled under the tree to keep the tree. So I mean those are some of the decisions that you need to make that every day not every day but every week a big question like that would come up, so you don't think about those things.
So one of the questions that came in online is is very similar, and I think you've probably basically covered it, but I'm going to read it anyway just to make sure we don't shortchange any of it. So this is from Donna Begay with the Water Boards. Donna thanks you for the great program management presentation and says that she has in the past been on the Cal EPA Tribal Advisory and worked with Department of Water Resources Tribal Advisory Committee. I was interested in how this very large and complex project worked with California tribes. Did you have a tribal liaison or archaeologist who had local knowledge of the California tribes, cultural landscapes, and issues?
I know we had a consultant with that expertise that we brought in whenever needed, and I knew when there were any field discoveries, we had tribal representation monitoring our work. At my level, I did not get involved with all the details, but obviously, there are strict requirements that need to be followed when you make any all recoveries. And when I talk about the trust of stakeholders, I think the trust of regulatory agencies was really important. I think in general, the San Francisco PUC has a very good reputation that way, but there was zero tolerance on our program for not disclosing any discovery, and when unsure, we would work with the agencies. I think the fact that we had that interagency task force with all with representative from all major agencies, resource agencies at the state and federal levels also promoted that trust. I mean, we met with them on a weekly basis almost, or monthly basis at a minimum, and they were aware of everything. So I think that was also very key to us being able, and they were very cooperative. When we would have discovery, I have to say that all agency were aware of how much was at stake. I mean, when you think about a $600 million project, a week of delay is very costly. The escalation costs on these large projects. So you need to be able to resolve these issues, and I commend all the agencies we work for, you know, helping us out, resolving our issues as quickly as we did.
Any other questions in the room?
Hi, Julie. I'm Bruce Burton. I work in the Drinking Water Regulatory Program, and thanks for your presentation.
Okay.
You indicated that you had 10 independent panels, or and we've
Oversight
had-
bodies, I call them.
Right. You had a myriad of stakeholders. What process did you use to appoint people or ask people to be on these panels? Because I'm assuming they cover a variety of areas. And just from my limited experience, some stakeholders may want input that, I don't know if I would call it inappropriate, it just wasn't relevant to
Yeah.
the particular independent panel.
Yeah, we did not, when I talk about these oversight bodies, it's not any oversight bodies that we appointed. It's, for example, the California Seismic Safety Commission is one of those oversight body. At the time, the Department of Public Health was an oversight body. Whenever we would make a change on the program, those would need to be reviewed by these bodies. But you're absolutely right that you have so many stakeholders with different interests, and trying to balance all of those is challenging. I often said that when you would find yourself with interest group with very different opinions or positions, if you ended up with a resolution where everybody was equally unhappy, you did a good job. And that's what we did when we had, for example, the issue regarding how much more water we would take off the Tuolumne. Our wholesale customers were not happy that we were not able to get more water. The interest groups were not as happy that we were not, you know, taking less water from the river. So, you know, trying to reach those compromises. But, and at our end, I think what is key too is to not necessarily have that many people deal with the stakeholders, because then your message gets, you know, maybe not quite as consistent. So I think the role of a program manager or director of a program is to do a lot of the stakeholder management. And as far as the oversight, and then there were some of those oversight, third-party oversight or independent panel that we brought in. And what we did there is we made sure that these individuals, oftentimes very senior individuals, had absolutely no involvement with any of the firms that did work on the WSIP. And that was difficult because on the big programs like that, pretty much the who's who of the consulting world was involved in the program. But we found people who had no involvement come in and give their you know, their opinion. And that's when having that outside validation, I think, helped with some of those stakeholders when everybody is fighting for their own thing. Having a third party say, hey, based on our X amount of years of experience, this is the right thing to do. And at some point, you have to realize that you're never, I mean, I'm sure you know that, you're never going to make everybody happy. And it's being selective about which battles you really want to take on and which ones you're going to give into. You know.
Great. So this question is from Bob Brownwood, our San Francisco district engineer for the drinking water program. Were the pipelines and other major conveyance facilities designed for rapid repair following catastrophic failure? For example, shut-off valves before and after faults with replacement pipes, or ability to get pipes on site within days instead of months?
Very good question. One of the first projects implemented as part of the Water System Improvement Program was the construction, I guess, of sites throughout our system where we could stockpile pipes and joints and everything we needed to be able to effect repairs very quickly after an earthquake. We even purchased pipe production equipment. So we had stockpiles of steel plates where we could have also produced our own pipes, manufacture our own pipes on both sides of the bay. So that's a very, and in a lot of our design, like in the case of the Hayward Fault, for example, there was some thought put behind, okay, we're building this new lifeline, but the two existing pipelines are likely to fail. So we actually engineered the failure of those existing pipeline by creating a weak point in the area of those existing pipelines to be able to then handle the water that would come out of these ruptured pipeline and be able to make sure that this rush of water would not undermine the new pipelines. That, yeah, I mean, in some ways, you cannot make your system absolutely bulletproof. So you need to think, okay, I will have rupture. So, and again, one of the whole goal of the program is to be able to have the system deliver the average winter day demand within 24 hours of a major earthquake. So in order to do that, it's not only having that lifeline, it's also being able to effect very quick repairs. Another good example on some of our treatment facilities, they are part of the facilities that we knew were going to fail, and that was okay. I mean, they were critical part of the facility that couldn't fail. But if, you know, the ozone building in one area does sustain some damage, as long as we can keep operating, that's all that mattered. You know, the other thing, too, that I did not refer to that I always like to talk about is the curve of diminishing return, right? You know, you can get to 80% reliability by investing a certain amount of money, but to try to get from the 80 to the 100, I mean, that curve flattens out there. You could make some, you know, some unreasonable investments, really. So we had to be very smart on not trying to make the system bulletproof in some areas and not having enough to invest in other areas. So.
Any other questions here in the room? I have one or two.
Okay.
So you've talked a lot about managing stakeholders and managing their expectations, and I think that's really important to a lot of us who are, you know, not only with major drinking water utilities, but we have staff here just from the water boards, not just drinking water, but financial assistance. We may have some Department of Water Resources people online listening, and we are, you know, especially with the likelihood of the water bond and what's in it, going to be faced in the coming years with gigantic expectations across the industry working together to try to get some major projects done. Everything from, you know, the huge projects that will be necessary for drought reliability, but also we have a lot of small and disadvantaged water systems in the state that people look to us in the regulatory community to be able to effect solutions. The other thing you talked about, though, was the need to spend, you know, real quality time in the pre-construction and pre-implementation phases of projects to make sure, you know, that you're doing the right project in the first place and that you are ready to engage in that project in a way that is going to go well. And I think what a lot of us are going to face across the industry is heavy pressure and expectation from stakeholders as soon as there's money to get out the gate with projects. And I think we're going to face also stakeholders, major stakeholders that come to the table with, I'll just say, kind of a preconceived idea of what those projects should be. They may be very committed to a particular strategy already, rather than being willing to work with everybody on coming up with a strategy to get to the particular outcome. So I just wondered if you had any suggestions about stakeholders who come to the table with a very strong commitment to particular strategy and want to see it get going now.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the level of master planning or preliminary alternative analysis that's been conducted before. I mean, my thoughts are more for a large program. Again, I think when you need to be clear on what you're trying to achieve in the end. I mean, the WSIP, for example, when the WSIP started, it was a list, not unsimilar to what you're describing. It was a list of projects that everybody put together, and I was part of the several groups that put that list together, and whoever screamed the loudest for their project had a better chance of having their project rise at the top. Now, whether that group of project was going to give the agency the outcome it really wanted, the seismic reliability it needed, the delivery reliability and all that, nobody had ever looked at that, you know? So we could have gone ahead and just, you know, invest in all these projects because this is what the list said, and we would have got some benefits, no doubt. But for the same amount of money, could we have gotten more reliability and better value? You sure bet so, and that's what happened in the end. Now, in your case, I would venture to say that there's probably some obvious projects that everybody agree that regardless of what we do as an overall strategy, especially with these smaller systems, we need to implement them. And I'm looking at that with some of our existing clients where you go to into their system and it's clear that a few things need to be done. So I think there's a way to implement a program where you fast track the implementation, design, and construction of a few projects, because you know they're going to be part of the overall strategy in the end. But rushing to implement projects that are not highly justified could end up, you know, costing you a lot of money and then bring the value that you wanted in the end. And in some cases, worst case scenario, it could even result in stranded asset later when you realize you want to do something different or you needed to do something different. So it's hard to answer as a whole, but, and obviously the more master planning you have ahead of time, the better, and then to identify those projects that should be fast-tracked. Like for the WSIP, 83 projects, and I talked about that a number of the smaller, less complex, more straightforward project went into construction right away in the first year, 2003. Main reason for that is a lot of those had, you know, very minor environmental review. So there's a way of accommodating both, I think, is the answer.
I believe we are at the end of our allotted time here. So, Julie, I want to thank you tremendously much for coming and spending this time with us.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Stefan. Okay.
we hope to have you back and talk even more.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Okay, okay.
We're done.
Oh, yeah, wow.
One thing that I was thinking about during the whole presentation was, what prepared you to step into this role?
Nothing. You know, do you know the name?